Hello, and welcome to the Divorced Dadvocate, divorce support for dads, where we help dads create a healthy and less traumatic divorce. My name is Jude Sandoval, and I'm your host. I created this podcast and the Divorced Advocate community as a result of my own high conflict divorce, and because you as a dad deserve all the resources necessary to thrive through this challenging time. I encourage you to check out our website at thedivorcedadvocate.com, where there are resources that correspond to this episode, as well as free access to our membership community, where you will find live meetings, free workshops and courses, private discussion groups, and more. And now, on to this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to the show. I am so appreciative of you being here today, and I am thrilled to have my guest on today. But before I introduce him, I wanted to welcome some of the new members to the community. We have Eric, Patty, Alina, Kenny, Billy, Jay, Ben, and Camilo. Welcome to the Divorced Advocate community. And you may have noticed that there's a couple of women's names, Patty and Alina. We do have about 10-15% of female listenership. Actually, that's from my Spotify numbers. So, and that's pretty good, indicative of our demographic. But I appreciate those that may have somebody, a dad that they know that is going through a divorce, that listens to this podcast. There are many that have reached out to me that have said this helps me with my boyfriend or husband who has an ex, or I have a son or a brother or somebody else that is going through a divorce or is newly divorced or contemplating divorce. So I appreciate the women that are listening to the podcast, and please continue to proliferate this far and wide everywhere you can so that we can help as many dads as possible. And on that note, check out the divorce quiz at the website at thedivorcedadvocate.com. It is an awesome tool to help you gauge where you're at in your divorce, and it will give you some immediate results telling you where you are doing well and maybe where you are struggling and where you can get some help. And so on the note of help, let me introduce my guest today. He has a 25-year background as a results-oriented leader in consulting, corporate and higher education settings, and he's been called a visionary, innovator, and leader because of his strong track record of success in strategic planning and leading organizational development and change management. He spent over a decade as a business school dean and many years as a chief academic officer. As a coach and mentor, he's cultivated a trusting environment of unconditional acceptance by intuitively sensing opportunities to empower others, helping both individuals and organizations discover and maximize their potential. Please welcome Dr. Eric Goodman. Doc,
thank you,
welcome.
Jude. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, glad to have you. And that second part, now, obviously you wrote this because I couldn't come up with all of this, but what I can attest to is that second part of what you talk about, of what it says of being intuitively sensing people and empowering others. I've known you long enough now to know that's really true of you. And that's why I was really excited and am really excited to have you on to share with the divorced dads today. And we're going to get into talking about your bank system and some of the other tools that you have that help. But before we do that, share a little bit about, I talked a little briefly here in your intro, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to start becoming a coach and mentor.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. So I think, I've always been in a coaching mindset. Even as a kid, I was playing sports and I was helping other people on the team. And in high school, I was the people that people would come to confide in and to brainstorm with. And so ultimately, though, I've been fascinated with psychology and human performance and what makes the difference between high performers and those that aren't as high performing. And that extends not only to individuals, but then ultimately extended to organizations to help really businesses go to the next level with really proven techniques and strategies to do that. And I found my way from the corporate world into education, earning my PhD in business administration. And then, as you shared, spending many years in educational leadership between dean roles and chief academic officer roles. And during that time, I had the privilege of coaching and mentoring thousands of teachers, faculty, deans, and others. And with that, I just love doing that, to be able to empower people to really discover their potential and maximize and really think about what's possible in life. Because oftentimes people don't think big enough and they have a lot of limiting beliefs, and life gets in the way and they sort of lose their way. So I help organizations do that to really differentiate themselves, and individuals to figure out sort of their purpose and calling and how that intersects with something the world needs and something that they'll get compensated for as well.
Right. So I'm curious, and I don't want to go too far down this road because we can get into the whole conversation about modern day education, et cetera, where that's at. And I don't want to do that. But so I'm curious what made you go from, because you said you like that lead and teach and coach, which you think in the educational system that you'd be able to do some of that. What led you from leaving there, where you could potentially maybe do some of that, to private, the private sector?
Great question. And really, it's my passion for helping businesses be successful. And I had a lot of opportunities to do custom corporate programs with different organizations or executive MBAs. And just a realization that as I worked with programs and seeing the types of students or executives coming through, whether it was an undergrad or a master's program or even a doctoral program, that people don't need to come to school. Don't get me wrong. It's really helpful. But I come from a family of entrepreneurs as well. And so really stepping into that to empower people with skills that they don't need to spend 2 years learning, that they can short circuit and not reinvent the wheel and not have to get an MBA to really crush it with their business and take it to the next level. So that was part of my passion. And then just getting involved with like local chamber of commerce and on the board and doing things to help businesses really grow and thrive. And it's a different ripple effect in terms of the impact. Obviously, business is the backbone of our economy, small and large. So really, being able to share that in a way that is easily accessible to individuals. And again, I really love the one-on-one, especially the executive coaching. And what I find oftentimes when I'm coaching an individual for their business or in the leadership role is you can't separate your business from your personal life. And so we get into a lot of those other aspects, and it's really optimizing somebody's whole life, because how you show up in one place is how you show up in another. And really looking at, the relationships people have, how to optimize that. And really, there's skills in life. And one of the things is helping people understand relationships and emotional intelligence and some other things. But it's my opportunity. I think I was at a different chapter in my life. And oftentimes, I think as I'm even coaching people, many times people climb the ladder of success to realize the ladder is against the wrong wall. Not that mine was, because I loved everything that I did, and the huge impact I was able to have through multiple universities on tens of thousands of individuals' lives. It's taking it to a different audience, really.
Awesome. So the way I hear that and sum it up is you're able to have more intimate interaction with and have a greater impact on business owners, people, et cetera, than you would have otherwise been able to. Yeah,
exactly. And with that, I think it's exciting when you're working with a CEO and particularly with larger organizations where you may have a Fortune 500 or 100 company that has 100,000 employees. Now, granted, I led a college of business where I had over 20,000 students just in my college alone. That's a pretty significant impact. But when you can touch an organization and help a leadership team, I do a lot of work with leadership development, where you can help them create a high-performing culture where the people are engaged and they're really leveraging their potential. That's extremely rewarding, and you can do that at scale. But I also enjoy doing it with solopreneurs and helping them grow and scale a business. So it's the best of both worlds.
Right. Well, and you talk a lot about working with business owners, CEOs, et cetera. And you and I know each other from a business to business organization that we're involved with. And I think one time when you were talking about your bank system, which we're gonna get into here now, I just jokingly said, can it help with my teenage daughters? And you seriously looked at me and said, yes, it absolutely can. And it can help with your relationship. And I've had people come and look at this and say it saved my marriage. You've told me that story before too. And so just the teenage thing piqued my interest. But so let's talk a little bit about the bank system, and then we can talk about, with the divorced or divorcing dads that are listening, how something like this might benefit them while they're going through what they're going through right now.
That sounds great. Absolutely. So, the bank system, it's interesting because with some of the universities and even the corporate training that I was doing, a lot of work around helping improve communications and helping leaders understand themselves, and using different tools to do that, often personality assessments. So I've used dozens of them, and many of them were built into like a master's of leadership or other courses or corporate training. And they were great. They help people understand themselves and a little bit about their strengths. But when it came to understanding how to relate to somebody else, it wasn't very easy for them to have a framework that they could apply when they were working with somebody in the workplace. And so when I came across this system, actually, one of the universities I was at, we had a major in sales. Not many universities have that, but it's all about, in sales, it's building know, like, and trust, and it's building that relationship with other people. And this is a tool that was actually developed specifically for sales, and they reverse engineered the personality system based on values, because your values are much more sort of stable than some of the psychological characteristics. And it was designed to understand what triggers the buying decision. But when you think about buying, it's all about relationship. And it's in my relationship, if I'm trying to get my daughter to clean her room, I'm trying to get her to buy into that. I'm trying to influence her to do that. If I'm trying to get my wife to go to a particular restaurant, it's an influence activity. If I'm dating somebody and I want to take it to the next level, it's like, can I build that type of relationship? Or if I'm in the workplace, obviously in the context of this, how do I build the know, like, and trust and convince my boss to give me a raise or a promotion? So it was originally designed for those types of things. But what happened as a result was people learned this system in terms of, how do I connect to different people? And since we're talking relationships, there may be some of the listeners that had read a book by John Gray many years ago, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. It's like, based on genders, you speak different language. And within the human race, this idea that we have different personalities. I think you would agree with that, Jude?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good thing too, because I'm kind of serious and grumpy a lot of the time. So it'd be awful if we had a lot of serious, grumpy people walking around.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen you serious and grumpy. Farthest thing from
that's
it.
my daughters.
Okay. So, in the same way that, like, maybe on gender, this is a much more refined distinction when we talk about personality types and what makes people tick, what's important to them, because we tend to do business with who we like and trust. And there's studies that have shown that in terms of being able to close sales. I won't get into the statistics, but ultimately you can think about roughly 1 out of 5 times you'll buy from someone who has a different personality type versus 4 out of 5 times when your personality type is aligned. And you can think about people you've related to, or maybe a purchase you've made, a car or a realtor you used, or like, why did you use that person? And then you can think about other salespeople that turned you off. It's the same thing in dating or marriage. Like, opposites attract and then they can attack. But ultimately, it's understanding, what is it about that person and how do I speak their language based on what's important to them? And I'll walk you through some of the distinctions between each of the different personality types. But that's where people started saying, oh my God, like, I recognized in my relationships at work, I became more skilled at being able to communicate with different types of people. And then I recognized my wife was this type, or my daughter or my son was this type, or my mother. And so, yes, I've had countless stories of this making people a better parent, or helping them find their next wife, or saving their kid's life. So it's priceless in terms of the impact it has beyond what it was originally developed for. So it's really a tool not only for revenue to increase that, but for increasing the quality of your relationships.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Jude with a quick reminder about the Divorced Advocate Foundation for Fathers, which is our nonprofit that helps dads through divorce with legal education, free or reduced cost coaching, and mental health resources. If you own a business or know someone who does, there's an easy way to help by connecting credit card processing through our partner program. Part of the fees go straight to the foundation with no added cost to the business, and 98% of businesses are actually able to save money on their processing fees. It's a win-win. So if you know a business that accepts credit cards, get them in touch with me by sending a warm introduction email to jude@thedivorcedadvocate.com or give me a call directly at 720-255-1021. Yeah, and I want to just mention to the listeners also to hang tight all the way to the end, because Dr. Goodman's going to have a special offer for anybody that's listening that we'll also put in the show notes as well. But I just wanted to say or just make that distinction about the differences, because I've done like all the DISC and the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs. I'm a ENFJ. I think I'm an Enneagram 1. Like I've done all these. Like I'm one of those ridiculous person that takes all those quizzes to take, which person are you in which movie? And it's like, whatever. But I really appreciate the fact that this one is based on values, because in the work that I do, and many of the listeners will probably are going to be nodding their head with, oftentimes what we find when we start to go through this process of divorce is that we didn't do enough research in understanding. Well, maybe first didn't know what our values were, but if you did and you met somebody, you didn't go through and really determine what those common values were and why they were important, and if they were shared, and if you could actually live a life together based upon having those shared values or not shared values, whatever those might be. I know for me that became glaring at some point, which was one of the reasons why I had to get a divorce. So that absolutely fascinates me, because I've not heard that. I know the ENFJ, and it talks about, how you make decisions and then how you react, and like all of that stuff. In an Enneagram, you like to be first or whatever it is. But this is really, really, really different. So you go through and start us along what those different categories are in values.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at bank, and it's just like a bank that, you're depositing your money in, and you're
BANK.
BANK. And each of them, it's really an acronym for each of the different personality types. And within this, and there are 4 primary types. And what I want to also share is, unlike some of the things you were just sharing, some of the other ones that are out there assessment wise, this assumes we're all of them, just to varying degrees. And it approaches it also with more of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, which means that, we can actually learn and grow. We're not maybe introverted or extroverted or driving or this or Enneagram 1, or, those are categories and labels, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And in this case, this is a system designed to help you really understand, how do you flex and meet somebody where you're at? So one other thing before I start sharing the specifics on each of the types, I grew up with the golden rule: treat others how you want to be treated. And I think when you extend this to your relationships, it's like, well, those people are not me, so they don't want to be treated like me. You really need to understand the platinum rule: treat others how they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. So the B stands for blueprint. And when you think about a blueprint, you probably think about building something, right? You've got a plan. And with a blueprint personality type is somebody, and I'm also, maybe just for the sake of visualization, think about a box. A blueprint person is inside of a box. They live inside of a box in a structure that's very stable. They like systems. And if you haven't heard the acronym for systems, it's save yourself time, energy, money, and stress. And they ability to have a proven system in your life, in your business is really important because it helps you avoid risk. If you've got a system, there's a plan, there's processes, they like the predictability of it. They like responsibility and duty, and they know that rules are meant to be followed. That's how they think about them. And ultimately, they value other things like credentials. And because they like the predictability and stability, they like routines and traditions and titles. And I invite you to think about, for each of these types, somebody you know that is inside of the box that's very much like that. And these are the people. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And when you have that in mind, then you've got a framework that you can compare it to, because you'll start seeing these different types of personalities in all sorts of different settings, whether personally or professionally. So that's really the blueprint personality type. And for them, there's different things, different ways of communicating to them, obviously, because they want to avoid risk. And these are the people that are going to be early to a meeting, right? That value timeliness. And I'll talk about some examples with parent-child sort of relationships and how that shows up a little bit later, some examples. But ultimately, similar to the blueprint, the next personality type is action. And unlike the blueprint that's inside of the box, the action person, they are blasting out of the box. These people like drink Red Bull for breakfast. And you can think about the color red, and also blueprint, think about the color blue. But for an action type person, they like walking the red carpet. They like being in the limelight, the center of attention. From head to toe, it's all for show. They love, going fast. You can think about your car and like the RPM gauge, like redlining it. But they like flexibility and freedom and spontaneity. They like opportunity and excitement and attention. They want to win, because second place is just a first place loser, and that's not going to be them. They like to compete. They like fun. And again, it's about image. So think about people that that are like that. These are the movers, the shakers, the millionaire makers that really get people excited and energized. And, it's like they drink Red Bull for breakfast sometimes. So that's the action personality. And again, and they're just blasting out of the box. The blueprint's inside of the box. And then after the energy of an action, you got to take a deep breath. And then you got to exhale out, because the N is a nurturing personality type. And a nurturing personality type isn't inside of the box, and they're not blasting out of the box. These are the people that probably recycle a box. For them, it's about relationships. It's about authenticity. It's about personal growth and significance and teamwork and being involved with something, being part of a community or a team, and making a difference in the world through that with charities. And they value ethics and harmony and morality. And again, just making a contribution to something bigger than them. So for a nurturer, it's really all about the relationship. It's about the human connection and very sort of emotional sort of connection with other people. And then the K is the knowledge personality type. These are people that are not inside the box or blasting out of the box or recycling the box. These are the people that invented the box, right? These are the visionaries. These are the thinkers. And actually, these are the people that think out of the side of the box, or even question, like, why do we need a box? Maybe we need a octagon or some other thing. I don't know. But a knowledge type personality, for them, really the theme is all about information. And they're very much into learning and logic and self-mastery. They love technology. They love research and development, science, things that are universal truths that they can, like the scientific method or having a hypothesis that you can prove. They value expertise and competence and accuracy. They want to understand the big picture. So you can think about that. And ultimately, one other distinction between the personality types that I want to share is when you think about a blueprint, because they like the structure and the consistency and they want to avoid risk, and they're a planner, there's a lot of sort of in the head thinking that they have. And they're similar to knowledge in that way as well, because it's all sort of logic and everything else. And you can contrast the blueprint knowledge being in the head to the action type personality or the nurturing type personality that are very much more emotional. And I mention that because it'll give you some context as we start, if we want to talk a little bit about sort of parenting kids or how that shows up and the differences. Because a lot of times what happens is You're parenting the kids you wish you had, not the kids you actually have, not
Hmm.
recognizing who they are. So does that help you understand sort of the blueprint, the action, the nurturing, and knowledge?
Yeah, and I was going to ask, have they looked to see if these run anywhere along gender lines? Like men tend to be more blueprint, women tend to be more nurturing.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of stereotypes around that in the
Hmm.
workplace, and that's, led to some of the glass ceilings for women or people being perceived one way or another. But we don't have enough data. When you think about it, there's 8 billion people on this planet, and they have captured several hundred thousands people's codes as it relates to this to sort of
Yeah.
see, but nothing. And there are variations based on occupations and things that people are attracted to that are a better fit based on sort of what they value and that they can really leverage their passions. But no, so far there's nothing really that has been determined about those. And I don't expect there would be based on the distinctions in my experience, because you run into people of all types in different occupations. And in general, people would have a stereotype that, well, women are more emotional, so they tend to be more nurturing, right?
Hmm.
That's not always the case, though. And those women that are more action oriented, they can be perceived differently in the workplace.
Right.
If they're not nurturing versus a man who's doing that in terms of how they're perceived. And there's a lot of
Right.
words that I probably won't use on a podcast associated with some of the labels they would have, but that's a great
Sure.
question. And interestingly, this company that developed it, their mission is to connect and empower humanity. And their belief is there's 6,500 different languages on this planet, but what if understanding these values distinctions and just these four types, but ultimately it's the sequence of the type as well that's important. So really there's 4 factorial, or 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 for those of you who know math, 24 different permutations of it. It's like an ATM card. When you go in, you got a 4-digit PIN code, and if you
Hmm.
don't enter it right, you're not going to get any money out. And it's the same thing about understanding who you're talking with. If you don't get the codes right and you're not communicating in the same language, it's almost as different as speaking a foreign language. Like if I
Right.
speak English to somebody who speaks English, we're going to connect. If I speak English to someone who doesn't know English and speaks French, then it's not going to work. And it's the same difference between the codes. And that's why in sales, there's this myth, you got to go for the no. And the reality is, you've got to go for the yes. And you can do that if you have a predictable system that gets results with
Right. Right.
influencing somebody.
Yeah. So before we get into that and the specifics of it, I'm curious if they've put this up against the big 5 personality traits.
Mm-hmm.
Have they looked at those and compared them and found any overlap, or one personality trait fits into one of the 4 different ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. When you look at the different personality systems, and a lot of them have the different quadrants. I mean, the big 5, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's an acronym to remember that. It's ocean: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Those are probably more stable than most of the other personality systems
Right.
out there. And there's longitudinal studies that
It's
have shown
probably
that.
it's probably the only one that's been
Mm-hmm.
scientifically validated, as far as I know.
Yeah, exactly. And so how it relates, I mean, there's some overlap, but it's not a one-to-one correspondence, because again, some of those things are not necessarily things that drive decision making or buy-in or
Hmm.
buying ing behavior. Um, but there are some correlations. But the difference is that with bank, in the training that I do, you can help people really understand this very quickly. And literally, with what we'll share with individuals, it's 90 seconds versus taking some of these other assessments where you'd be maybe a half an hour of answering questions to try to figure out your profile. And it's not something you could look at or figure out in conversation. Whereas with this system, and there's an AI tool that's been called the Future of Sales in Forbes as well, that correlates with this, or that was built off of this. It's just a different model. So it's not a apples to apples comparison.
Okay, so then let's talk about how this can help us with our kiddos, or maybe co-parenting with our X or soon to be X and figuring out
Sure.
in 90 seconds how to solve all of those problems.
Yeah. Well, let's start with the co-parenting thing. I think it's important to recognize some communication tips, and we'll take each personality type and just talk about that as it relates to the co-parent and then your child, if you've got
Mm-hmm.
one. And ultimately, in blueprint communication, you want to make sure that with the other person, you're telling the truth and focusing on the facts. You want to be calm and firm with your voice. You want to have a plan and know your schedule. Again, think predictability, think routine. There's another of other things. They want to avoid risks. You don't want to do anything unpredictable or out of the blue, and you want to know the rules and follow them. That's what they expect. And so when you deviate outside of the box, the co-parent is going to not receive that very well if they happen to be a blueprint. And then with a child, how that often shows up is with parenting them, you want to keep a schedule and communicate so they know the plan. And you want to have a routine and follow it. You want to provide consistency with them. And you want to be very clear about things like curfews or bedtimes or timelines. And I'll share an example. There's an individual that went through the training, Jeff, who very high action personality. So again, contrast that. He's wants flexibility and spontaneity, opportunity, sort of last minute a lot of times. And he had a blueprint son who was playing soccer. And there's one day where the son came up to him and said, "Dad, this is really bothering me, but I need to ask you, why are you a liar?" And he was like taken back. He's like, "What do you mean? Why am I a liar?" And he's like, "Well, I have soccer practice every weekend. And you always say, I need to be ready at this time and we're going to leave. And we never leave on time. I'm always late. I'm the last kid there. And it's embarrassing." And he thought about it. And ultimately, it wasn't until after this training that he sort of put it together and figured out his son was a blueprint. And that's why his son was sitting, waiting by the front door a half an hour before they were going to leave in the car. He had his soccer uniform laid out the night before and everything else. And he was like, "Oh my God, I need to provide him with that structure." And then there's another individual who basically, when we talk about curfews, similar type of personality, action personality. And the daughter's like, "Well, when do I need to be home?" And he's like, "Well, whenever you want." And she's like, "What do you mean? Whenever you want?" And then you'd one day it would be like, "You need to be home by 9." And the next day it would be like, "I want you home by 10." And just inconsistent. And he also went through the training and recognized that, you know what? I think this is true of kids in general. They need the consistency, right? Particularly with the co-parenting situation. But ultimately, when he recognized that, he actually shared with you, he said, "I'm sorry that I have been inconsistent. I recognize you need predictability, and it wasn't fair for me to be doing that to you." And ultimately set a consistent time frame. And it was just like after he did that, after learning at the training, he shared that for the first time in years, one day his daughter just jumped on his lap and said, "Daddy, I love you."
To hear the rest of this episode and access the corresponding resources, visit thedivorcedadvocate.com and become a member of our community. It's free to join and will provide you with the resources you deserve as a divorced or divorcing dad. Thank you for listening. God bless, and I'll talk with you next week.